We're so happy to have you, and my heart like just breathes a sigh of relief every time I see that person I'm waiting for log on to Zoom. The password was right and the link worked.
Yeah, I've had some events where they say, "Can you log on a half hour beforehand, please?" You know, they're really everyone's very careful because they don't want it all to fall apart.
Yes, I think it would be a lot less entertaining if it was just me here chatting with the group. So thank you.
Is I don't know if there's a quick answer to this question, but are the participants in this group all local? Are they in Lawrence or are they everywhere?
Everywhere.
Wow.
Everywhere
Great.
across the world. I think last time, I'm sure I'm gonna be wrong, but someone was here from
Hungary, I think.
Hungary. How is it? Hungary.
Wow.
Hungary. So it was a very big time difference, but they made it here. They logged off a couple minutes early to go back to bed. So all of
Well, that's thrilling. That's terrific, and to have a club with so many members, that's really nice and it's all done through the alumni office or just informally.
So the Alumni Association has partnered with KU Libraries, and we work together to do this. The Alumni Office sends out all the communications, and the libraries really drives the book selections and the discussion questions and all of that. So it's a great partnership between the two entities.
Yeah.
And all of the alumni that participate just make it great.
Fabulous. I'll give a little more introduction, or maybe not. I'm sure it's something that many of you have heard before, but I suppose, Michelle, are we live on Facebook? Should we kick it off?
I'm hitting the button as we speak.
Okay, live on Facebook to our private group, of course, not broadcasting across the world on Facebook. Oh, I see it.
Are we up?
Okay.
It says it's now streaming live, so we are now on Facebook. Everybody be on your best behavior.
All right, well, we'll go ahead and kick things off. I'm sure people will pop on and pop off. We are casual, but it's just so nice to see all of your faces here tonight. And I'm sure we are all feeling the same sentiment that I wish we could be together in real life, but for now, I think this is pretty perfect, so we'll make it work. Many of you know me or recognize me, but I'm Leah Hallstrom. I'm the communications coordinator for KU Libraries, and I facilitate all of our online discussions for the Jayhawk Book Club, and then those are sent out by Michelle to alumni folks on email as well. And I'm super excited to see a lot of faces that I recognize and many new names here too. So thanks to everyone who this is their first time joining. And I'm just so excited. So we're here tonight with Bob Kolker, the best-selling author of Hidden Valley Road. And
Hi, everybody.
Hello, Bob. How are you doing tonight?
I'm just fine. I'm really thrilled to be invited here and to be included. Thank you.
Yeah.
I have a little picture in my mind of KU because I've been to Lawrence and been to the campus many years ago. My older brother was a graduate student there, so I visited him at least twice and walked around.
Wow.
And I have a vintage fan in my kitchen that my wife and I bought at a store in downtown Lawrence that we brought home on the plane with us, I remember. And you know, so I sort of look at it every day.
Oh my gosh, that's fantastic. I love that story. Well, we are a good representation of the KU community and friends too. So we selected Hidden Valley Road this semester. This is our 7th book together. And like you heard, we now have more than 1,000 members. So people are reading right here in Lawrence and across the globe. So you don't have to be a Jayhawk. We accept all, and we are so excited to have a bunch of new faces and just new people joining all the time. So as all of us know, Hidden Valley Road was an instant #1 New York Times bestseller and was named a top 10 book of the year by the Washington Post, Amazon, and the New York Times. And for those of you who don't know, it was selected for Oprah's book club, and Bob got to talk to Oprah, and during their interview, she popped a bottle of champagne for his #1 on the New York Times bestseller list.
She was very proud, actually, that the book got to #1, and then that her people were able to surprise me with that. I have 2 kids. My 17-year-old daughter was doing tech support for the virtual interview, and so they had her cell number separately, and so they called her the day before and said, "We want to surprise your dad. Can you get your mom, to get a bottle of champagne and bring it down, at just the right time?" So they kind of stormed in to this room where I thought I was going to be alone the whole time, and handed over champagne. It was pretty funny.
It was very neat. I will share out a link with everybody if you would like to watch too. So I'm sure this is going to be just as exciting as talking to Oprah. So I'll go ahead and kick things off with that. And everyone is welcome to grab their own bubbly or beverage of your choice and snacks. So before we kick things off here tonight, so again, very casual, come and go as you please. We're just glad to have you. So like we explained just a couple of minutes ago, this is a collaborative effort between KU Libraries and the KU Alumni Association. And we just get to have a lot of fun because this club connects students and staff and faculty and alumni over this shared love of reading. And you can do it anywhere. So typically at the end of each selection, like I mentioned, we get together in person. But for the last couple of semesters, we've been doing these virtual chats, and we've been really fortunate to have several of our authors join us, and again here tonight. So Michelle, our partner at the Alumni Association, is going to share a few tech-related thoughts before we get started.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight. So we do ask that you kind of stay muted during the discussion unless it's a kind of open discussion period and we've called on you for questions. You can always type questions or thoughts into the chat as well. And we can then relay that to the group, or if you chat to everybody, obviously everybody can see it. And we'll kind of open up probably, as we get a little farther in here to see if any of the group has questions, but it just helps cut down on feedback and background noise and all of that if we stay muted. This is live on Facebook, as we mentioned before. So if for some reason your connection fails or you have to hop off, you can always catch the rest of the video on Facebook later on. It'll be posted there later, and we'll upload it to the Alumni Association YouTube channel also once we're all done with this. So like I said, if you have any questions, type them in the chat or hold on to them and then ask them kind of as we get a little bit farther along and we open it up to the group. But otherwise, enjoy.
Perfect. Thank you, Michelle. All right. So Bob, would you please kick us off and introduce yourself to us and just tell us a little bit about how you got started as an author?
Sorry. Thank you. And I want to thank Leah personally. We've been emailing since the summer, since before the book made any year-end lists or anything like that. So thank you so much for picking this book. I've been a journalist, since my early 20s. So really 25 years or a little bit more. And I started in community journalism, writing about everyday people going through, difficulties or challenges, whether they were fighting a skyscraper that was being developed on their street, or worried about crime, or running for office. And I started at that local level, very different from some of my journalist friends who wanted to cover City Hall, or they wanted to cover the president, or they wanted to be a foreign correspondent, or they wanted to be Woodward and Bernstein. For some reason, I never really connected with journalism that way. I always wrote about everyday people. And I liked coming back week after week at this little newspaper in Manhattan and writing what would happen next and what would happen next. I really got hooked on narrative journalism that would tell a story. And then as my career took shape at New York Magazine, those stories always had sort of two different tracks to them. There was the story itself of what happened to these people, and then there was always a bigger issue bubbling under the surface that people could relate to. And looking back, it's interesting to me that Hidden Valley Road is really of a piece with what I've been doing my whole career, only I've been sort of working up the nerve to do books all these years, and finally I'm able to do it. This is a story about a family, and it's first and foremost a family saga, as you all know, but it also is about a mysterious illness and the story of that illness. And the goal was that the understanding of the story of that illness would help give context to the family story at every stage. I didn't want a book that felt like homework. I didn't want it to feel like a case study or a science textbook. I really wanted something that would be first and foremost about a family, but that perhaps not even realizing it, you might learn a thing or two. And actually that is not original on my part. There are a lot of really amazing narrative nonfiction authors who are really wonderful at sneaking in really difficult material into the middle of a compelling story. Even books like Moneyball by Michael Lewis, for instance. Even if you don't care about baseball or about statistics, you care about the story, but then every now and then he kind of like sneaks in this very, very difficult intellectual information about statistics or about the buying and selling of baseball player contracts. And you find you're interested in them, and then he pulls away at just the right time that you might get bored and gets back into the story. So that was my goal with Hidden Valley Road, was to, beyond the other goals, which I'd love to get into, was to tell a story where I could pull away and offer context, but then pull back into the story before you get bored. And I was constantly second guessing myself about how much science to include. And in revision, with the help of my editor, Christine Popolo, we really worked hard to tie those science sections down and get them lean and mean, and make sure that they always were about setting the table for the Galvin family story, that it was never, I didn't want people to turn the page to a new chapter and hear me say, here's something cool I learned about schizophrenia while working on this book. I didn't want to be so hooked on my own research that I would think everything was interesting. So I made sure to try to keep it disciplined. But I had other considerations too. I mean, I had 12 children and 2 parents, and wanted to make sure I was fair to all of them and accurate to their point of view. I had events that happened 40 years ago that some people remember differently from others, and I had to play the referee and figure out exactly what made sense as a credible story to tell. I had, most of all, the experience of mental illness to portray in a way that I wanted to make sure was something that everybody could read, that even somebody with acute mental illness in their family or someone experiencing mental illness, I wanted them to feel like this book was for them too. That I didn't want the sick brothers to be presented as the other, or as like a monster, or as some special creature that we had to worry about. I wanted them to be people too. And I found when I got to work on the book that that turned out to be not as hard as I thought. As the second, I think it speaks to my own naivete, that when I first met the sick brothers who are still alive, I immediately said, oh yeah, well, of course they're people. I mean, they're very different. They have very different personalities. They're all in different stages of their illness, but they also have their own thing going on. So I immediately calmed down about that and realized that it was a chance to try to do justice to a certain mental illness in a way that perhaps other people hadn't tried. Mm-hmm. Most mental illness stories are about our memoirs, about someone's uncle or about themselves. And this is different from that. It's an objective journalist's point of view, and it tries to get the whole family involved and get as many points of view as possible. And so I knew going into it that it would be very difficult, but also that it would be original. But I didn't know whether or not it would be successful. And the family didn't either. And they took a huge risk being involved in this. It was really the sisters, Margaret and Lindsay, who came to me through a friend, an editor of mine, an old editor of mine at New York Magazine, and a good friend of mine who knew the family. One day in 2016, I get a call from my friend, John Gluck. He says, I went to high school at Hotchkiss with Lindsay, and so I know the family. And for many, many years, they'd been thinking of finding a way to have their story told, and now they realize that it's too big for one family member or 2 family members to do it, and there's too much scientific information and too many perspectives of too many people, and they'd like to see if an impartial journalist could handle it. And John thought of me because I'd been doing similar stories to this for many years before, but nothing this difficult. And when I met the sisters, when I talked to them on the phone, I thought it wouldn't be possible, because I'm sure many people here in the meeting know that we have, medical privacy laws in this country, HIPAA laws, and I needed everyone's consent to write about their health conditions. And I thought at least one brother would stand up and say, no way, I don't want a book about this. But they were all ready. They were ready. It had been decades since the worst of it happened. They knew how invested the sisters were in it. They decided to support the sisters' point of view. And Mimi was ready, the mother. She, after many years of not being interested in a book, she was so excited by the medical breakthroughs that I discuss later in the book, that she felt sort of vindicated, that the science had seemed to come out on her side and prove that it was genetic and not about bad parenting. So she felt comfortable talking. And so it all came together in a way that really surprised me. And so I went to work. The science stuff was all new though. So that was a heavy lift as well. I guess I can, that's a pretty nice stopping point, and I'm happy to talk with folks about anything. If I can answer any questions you have, but if there's no, if there are no questions, sometimes I like to ask groups questions too, to see what they think about this and what they think about that, like to focus group the book.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, I mean, we do have a couple of questions just that our members submitted, so we could start there, and then we'll definitely leave time, because now I'm very intrigued, and I'm sure the rest of our group is too. And I think that was a really excellent introduction. Actually, I had many lists of questions. I'm like, oh no, that's one of mine too. So you covered a lot. I think you answered a lot of great questions that our group had. So one of our members, Teresa Green, wondered how long it took you to research the book, and then how long it took you to actually write the book.
Well, as I said, when I first talked to those sisters, I really was skeptical that anything could happen. I also had just started a job. I had just started as a reporter for Bloomberg Businessweek, writing magazine articles for them. And so what I said to them was, nothing happens quickly with books anyway. So why don't, and none of us know how workable this is. So I made them an offer. I said, what if I got on the phone once a week for an hour with a different family member of yours, starting with their mother, with Mimi, who was still alive. And I would be very informal. I would say, so your sisters are interested in having a book written about your family. How does that make you feel? Like, what do you think? But if there were a book, what would you think the book should say? And then I would feel them all out. Just an hour, nothing more, just once a week, not very demanding. And then I'd probably get on the phone with a couple of the doctors as well. So that's when they put me in touch with Dr. Friedman in Colorado and Dr. DeLisi in Massachusetts. And then maybe I would get on the phone with one person who didn't know the family, but who was an authority in schizophrenia, just so that I could ask them the big question on my mind, which was, is this family really as significant as they seem to think they are? What if it's just, what if it's really a ho-hum thing and it just seems like a big deal to me that so many children would have schizophrenia? And I said to them, so that would be about 10 weeks maybe, but it was spring, like by the end of summer, I said, by the end of summer, we'll all know one way or another if this is really doable. And if it isn't doable, I'll send you the tapes from all the phone calls, and then the two sisters could go to work on a memoir or something like that. And that would be my good deed for the year. And, and sure enough, everybody was on board and everybody was up for it. And it was all, and I learned from Dr. DeLisi that she was just about to publish a study that sequenced the family's gene. And I learned from Dr. Friedman about choline and how eager he was to spread the word about choline. And so I started to take it very seriously. And I went to Colorado in the fall and visited the family and had a book proposal ready about a year after I first talked to the sisters. So the short answer about how long it took was, it took a year of preliminary talking to everybody and meeting with everybody to make sure everything was solid and writing a book proposal. And then once I sold the book to Doubleday, it took a year and a half to write a first draft, and then another year to revise that first draft. So 2.5 years of work. And I'll say that from the moment that I sold the book and got to work, I was confident that I was going to be able to tell an interesting story because I knew that the family was all involved and up for it, and that they were ready to help me find medical records that they hadn't found yet. But I was not sure how confident how well I would do writing about the science of schizophrenia. I was starting from zero there. So I bought a zillion books, used books, which are very, it was a very, very cheap research budget because all of these old books are inaccurate, right? So that you're buying like $1.50 paperbacks from 1945 or 1965 that have the wrong science in them. But I'm learning like how the story of schizophrenia evolved. And that part I was really starting from zero. So it was a nice mix of family stuff that I felt pretty confident about and science, which I was excited to be learning something new, which is why people become journalists, to be able to try and learn something new.
Absolutely. That's great. Thank you. So you kind of touched on this a little bit, but, because so many of the stories that you tell through this book about the family dynamic and then actual situations came from Mimi and from the girls, along with some of the other children. Did you feel like you were always getting the real and true story and not, if Mimi was kind of wearing rose-colored glasses, or if some of those other memories were from, accidentally inaccurate just from age or trauma? I can imagine you there with like a string board trying to like connect theories and like try to decide, and I guess police reports and hospital records, and how did you kind of navigate that and know what was true?
I first ran into two issues. The first was that both sisters said to me, "Oh, we have a lot of issues with our mother and with our parents and the decisions they made when we were younger. Particularly how they put us in harm's way with their brother Jim, and they must have known that something was wrong with Jim, and yet they were all right with them being around him." And so they felt like there was a lot of denial, and they both said to me, she still is in denial. And so when I finally met with her personally, I had both sisters with me, and I think that scene's in the book. And she was a natural deflector of bad subjects. She would be asked something uncomfortable, and of course she's 91 or 92. You're not going to be prosecutorial with her or anything like that. And she would not answer the question, and she would talk about, the sandwich she was eating or a book she wanted to loan her grandchild or something. And that was okay with me because I was there to get to know her and see what she was like to be around. I wasn't there to, I didn't feel like it was a Woodward and Bernstein moment where I was trying to extract some special admission from her. But the sisters, Lindsay and Margaret, were getting frustrated. They would say, "Mom, come on, get back to it. Talk about this, talk about that." And eventually she was able to talk a little bit about some of that stuff. So that was the first moment of that. And then the second one was with the sisters themselves, because they came to me together, and I immediately wondered, well, perhaps this is a book about two sisters who clung to one another in a difficult family situation and saved each other's lives and helped each other through the worst of things. And that when I started spending time with them separately, I learned that the two of them actually processed their family traumas rather differently, that they helped each other for many years, but that they also clashed for many years, that they were not always on the same page about things. And I had maybe a day or two of freaking out about that, thinking, wait a minute, that's not the story I thought this was. Mm-hmm. And then I realized that this was real. I have a brother and I have a sister, and I'm sure our family memories, if you asked us all the same questions about our family growing up, that our answers would all be a little skewed and a little self-serving, and there'd be some overlap, but not other overlap. Mm-hmm. And that's the way it is. And so I thought, well, this is actually a gift to readers. They can see two women who went through very similar things growing up, but dealing with it in two very different ways. And the reader can actually ask themselves as they're reading, would I be more like Margaret or would I be more like Lindsay? And there wouldn't be a right or wrong answer. I don't go in to play referee. I go in to try and explain everybody's rationale. Everybody maybe except Jim. I tried to explain their rationale. And that's part of my worldview as a journalist. I feel like most there are exceptions, obviously, but in most stories, there are no heroes and villains. There are only people with conflicting agendas and who rationalize their actions, and everybody thinks they're the hero, and everybody, or hopes they are, but they're inevitably they bump up against one another. And that I thought would be a real family story that people could relate to, even outside of schizophrenia. People could read this and go, oh, this is a little like my family. I'm a little like Lindsay. I'm the one who takes care of mom, and I'm the one who gets mad when my brother and sister don't take care of mom.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, because I think at times it was difficult to comprehend that these were actual people and not just characters. I think it's easy to read a story and be like, oh my gosh, I would never do that. Or why didn't this character make a different choice? But this was actual, factual events that were happening. So I really like that.
Yeah, I had one very close friend who read it all late in the game. And she said to me that once you get closer to the present day and there are scenes that it's clear that I was there for, and everybody's speaking in quotes, that it's this kind of wake-up call to the reader that these are actually real people, like that the whole time they were real the whole time, but now they just seem more real because they're operating in the present day and talking to one another and saying things.
Yeah, absolutely. And having families of their own that, they had to make these decisions that weren't just made for them when they were children growing up. Like, this is my reality, and now they got to form their own reality. So I think that's definitely spot on toward the end of the book. So were there any stories that you heard that were just too raw or tough to digest that you did not include in the book? And not asking for specifics, just anything.
I think I left it all on the field. Let's see. There were a couple of, there was one brother, I won't say who talked about Jim mistreating him. And then, I kind of flick at the idea of all the roughhousing that went on and the boys being inappropriate with one another and with the girls. And the girls remember another brother or two, kind of crossing the line with them at different moments. Mm-hmm. But it didn't rise to the level, it might have been wrong and completely wrong, but it didn't rise to the level of what happened with Jim. And and they had essentially patched things up and had good relationships with those brothers now. So it seemed like it would just be like too much for the reader to process. Sometimes in a nonfiction book, if you mention on page 3 that that somebody likes to have 4 drinks after dinner every night, or something like that, like that's all you think about the rest of the book. Like you think well, when are we going to talk about the alcohol issue that this person has? So you have to kind of be careful what you bring up and when you bring it up, because you don't want to distract from the other story that you're trying to tell. So that might be something that I left out.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you for sharing. All right. So almost each of the boys who were diagnosed with schizophrenia showed different symptoms, and some of them were similar, but just that way that they were presented a little bit differently. Do you think that made it harder for Mimi, and obviously without talking to Dawn, but Mimi and Dawn, to really understand and accept what was happening in their family, and understand that it was the same thing, no matter how different it may look?
Yeah, I think that's true. I think that they could have, at different moments, they could have written off Jim's psychotic episodes as him being a drinker, or they misdiagnosed Michael. Remember the hippie who was standing around spaced out all the time, and they thought, well, he must have schizophrenia too, and it turns out, lo and behold, he did not. He just was not on that planet at the moment, and he kind of worked his way through it. And so, yeah, they were helpless. And they had unfortunate timing, because they were in a moment in America where the medical community wasn't going to judge them rather than actually help them or support them. And that's something that perhaps there are people in in the reading group who have experience with this, but my understanding is there's a lot more family support now and a lot less judging going on when somebody has acute mental illness in the family.
Was that a secret prompt for us?
No. I'm curious though. I mean, what you said about them presenting differently was very interesting to me too, because it's true. You know, Joe has hallucinations, but he's aware, he's self-aware, and Jim has paranoia and he's violent, and Donald is hyper-religious and delusional, but he doesn't have hallucinations. He has delusions, which are different, right? Like he believes certain things, and then you know, Peter does a very classic thing, which you read about all the time. It's in the newspaper every day, of this sort of cycling from jail to the street and to home, and then to jail and the street and home, because you're given meds which can control or help you in some ways, and then you become overconfident and you stop taking those meds, and then you start self-medicating with drugs from the street, and then you decompensate, and then you get in trouble with the police, and then you go back to jail again, and then the hospital and so forth. He's very, I think about him all the time when I read about police altercations with mentally ill people, and which are in the news now. I think about Peter. So yeah, they are all different, and it just speaks to the idea that schizophrenia is not a real disease. It's a classification. It's not like COVID-19 that you could look at in a microscope or understand at a molecular level. It's a term of art used to classify a bunch of different symptoms. And it's possible that 40 years from now, what we know of as schizophrenia will be 6 different brain disorders with 6 different names. There's already talk in the field of trying to get rid of the word schizophrenia because it seems to lump too much together, and to go after it a different way and classify it a different way. And that's a really complicated thing to get across in a book like this, but I hope to sort of weave that in as well.
Great. Thank you. All right, so one of our Jayhawk Book Club co-leads, Leanne Meyer, I don't know where she is on your screen, and my colleague at the libraries had what she said felt like dozens of questions, but she narrowed them down to just a few. So I'm going to prompt you just with one, that what do you hope that the reader learned from this book?
Well, I mean, I didn't write this book with COVID-19 in mind. Or with I certainly had no clue. But I mean, I think there are a lot of very good narrative nonfiction books about people who are going through real difficulties in their lives, experiencing real crises and coming through the other side. Sometimes they're crime books, but sometimes they aren't. Sometimes they're like this book, or like Behind the Beautiful Forevers by Catherine Boo, which is about the slums of Mumbai. And I think these stories like that they do more than just take you to a part of the world that you might never go to, or introduce you to a subject like schizophrenia that you may not have been interested in before. They also help you walk the mile in the shoes of someone who is experiencing some of the worst things in life. And I think readers, I know I do, when I read these things, I start scanning the book for tips on how to manage trauma, how to make it through crises. And I think, so my answer to your question is that looking at people like Margaret or like Lindsay or even like Mimi as examples of how they deal with life when the worst, most unimaginable things happen, and how perhaps it might help us as readers, process our own difficulties. In our society, in Western society, we try to distance ourselves from illness and from life's difficulties. People ask how you're doing. You're saying, "Oh, I'm doing great. I'm doing fine." We aren't out front with our problems. And so I think sometimes nonfiction books or novels or movies or true crime books or whatever stories that we tell are ways for us to process those emotions in a safe way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And I have a direct message here asking, do you know if any of the grandchildren have shown signs of the disease?
Luckily, no. And that doesn't surprise the doctors who know the family. They really think that what, at this point, they believe what happened was a was a collision between Don and Mimi's genes that led to a genetic abnormality that wouldn't necessarily be inherited by future generations, but perhaps might, slip out to an, hither and yon as the generations continue. But of course, if I were anyone in the Galvin's generation having children, I'd be very vigilant and very worried, no matter what. Like you've got to be worried that something is up. But the kids that I've met that I know are just fine.
That's great. And a question here from Michelle. Did anyone in the family get upset when the book was released, or had they previewed it? And are you still in contact with the family?
They previewed it, but not in time to make major changes. They did. There was time to make minor changes, like the name of a street is wrong, stuff like that. So the book came out in April. They read it in January, or maybe late December. And I think that the hardest time for them was probably that period after they read the book and before it started getting reviewed and coming out, because they were reading the book their way and skimming it for stuff about that was important to them, and maybe not really absorbing the whole thing. And they were, because it's their own story, they were all very worried about how it was going to present to other people. Is this just dirty laundry? Is it salacious or exploitative? Is it sensationalistic? And then as soon as the reviews started coming in, and particularly the Oprah's book club selection, they immediately, each one of them, sort of heaved a sigh of relief. And they said, oh, the intentions of the story are clear to everyone. People get it. They get that this isn't about a freak show or anything like that, that the intentions of the book are pure. And so they all feel really good about it. Margaret has been very happy to hear from lots of readers who are inspired by her journey of recovery and she offers advice and tips for self-care, and there's a lot of interest in her art as well, which is really good, by the way. And it's not like she has art that she can sell right now, so she can't really fill orders or anything like that, but it's nice that she's getting attention for her art. She works slowly. And Lindsay has become more of an activist on behalf of the mentally ill, not just her 3 sick brothers, but everybody. And she's joined the boards of a couple organizations and really is hoping to connect with other people like her who have mental illness in the family and want to raise awareness about issues surrounding them. Her big issue is how to deal with a close family member who's sick but is not self-aware, who doesn't believe that they're sick. And there is advice you can give family members about how best to be non-confrontational and helpful to those loved ones who need help but don't believe they need help.
Great, thank you. And I know we talked about Oprah and the champagne, and you mentioned it here, but this was another one of Leanne's questions, and I am positive that we're all dying to know too. But how did you react when your book was selected as Oprah's book club choice?
I would say it was a dream come true, but I never dreamed, because it's a nonfiction book. And although she did choose 2 nonfiction books this year, most of the time she chooses fiction. So I never thought that it would be an Oprah book. And so the call came out of the blue. In fact, it came from from a screened number, from a no caller ID number. And so I didn't pick it up. And then I got an email from the publicist at Doubleday, and he said, I have a reporter who's trying to reach you. The next time you get a call from no caller ID, could you please pick it up? And I said, okay. And then I thought, why is Michael being so cryptic? Normally it's, Entertainment Weekly is going to call you or something like that. And the phone rang and I picked it up and I heard, this is Oprah Winfrey. And I just started laughing hysterically because it sounded like Oprah Winfrey. It was clearly not a prank. It wasn't like, a buddy of mine pretending to be Oprah Winfrey. And I think I also laughed because I was pretty tense, because it was March and the pandemic was coming. And at that point, it wasn't even clear if Amazon was going to be selling books in the next month. They might just like take the month off from selling books and just ship toilet paper out. There was no telling what it was going to be. And as soon as I heard her voice, I thought, well, it's the book is saved. I mean, it has an instant readership who will read the book. So hooray. And I could really relax. And in fact, that was 4 weeks before they announced it. And when they announced it, one friend of mine did text me and she said, I knew something was up because you seem too relaxed. You seem too relaxed. But what I learned is that Oprah Winfrey is interested in these issues, that mental health is something she's always been interested in, and that she was even working on a documentary, I think with Prince
Harry,
yeah, about mental health and mental illness.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason she learned about this book, what I'm told is that Oprah chooses her books for her book club because different people in her world put books in front of her, scout out for books for her. It's not like she is on the phone with publicists herself. But in this case, it was the book's editor of Oprah magazine who said to her, I hear you're working on this documentary and here's this book, it might interest you. And she read the book and she came back and said, why don't we make this the book club book? And then also I realized that she probably would have had the Galvins on the air back when she had a daily TV show, that they were a perfect subject for her, a family like this. And so I see now in retrospect that it really is quite the right fit for her. And I'll just say it again in case I said it too quickly. She definitely saved the book. Like it's been a bad year for authors who want to get attention for their books. And I'm just amazed and very grateful that she supported it when she did.
That's great. I'm glad to hear it. And here we are, also Jayhawk Book Club, bringing it back.
Oh, and I can also say she's also a terrific interviewer. Obviously, we all know this, but I mean, I feel like, I'm a professional and my job is to make people feel comfortable when I talk to them, and I'm pretty personable and mature. I don't seem like a live wire or anything, and people are relaxed. But even virtually with her, like looking at my phone on Instagram and live and being interviewed by her, she had this way of making you feel like it was the most natural moment in the world, and that of course, yeah, we're just sitting and having a conversation. She really is very, very better than anyone I've ever seen at putting you at ease in a situation like that.
That's wonderful. What a cool experience.
Yeah.
Teresa Green in the chat says, are you working on a book currently? And if so, what is the subject?
I am not. I've been doing a lot of book promotion and I've been thinking about the next book, and I've been on the phone a lot with folks. Part of me thinks that I'm not done writing about families in some way. I think I had a previous book, Lost Girls, which is about 5 families that are connected to the same serial killer case. They each lost a daughter. And it really is a close look at the daughters' lives, but also the families as well. And only in hindsight, after this book came out, did I realize that the common denominator between the 2 books was these difficult family situations and these difficult family relationships. And so I am definitely eager to dive into that again, but I'm just not sure how. And definitely hit me up if you have any ideas. But I'll probably do some magazine stories on things that interest me in order to get the ball rolling on the next book.
Yeah, that's great. And Bob mentioned his former book, Lost Girls, which for those of you who don't know, is now a feature film on Netflix. So you can all end this chat tonight and go kick up your feet and watch Lost Girls on Netflix, starring Amy Ryan, that was released earlier this year.
Yeah, it just an accident of timing that, the book came out 7 years ago, but for the movie to come out just weeks before the new book came out, it made it a big year for me. It was really, really quite something.
That's great. 2020 has its first, I guess.
Yeah, definitely the weirdest year ever.
All right. I'm going to ask this question in the chat, and then I want to leave time for you, Bob, to question us. But Angela says, what are you reading right now? And do you have any recommendations for readers who liked Hidden Valley Road?
You guys have caught me in a moment where I'm reading books that don't have plots, that are like idea books. There's a book about the microbiome, a science book called I Contain Multitudes, and it's by a writer named Ed Young, and it's about a subject I know nothing about. Everybody talks about probiotics and your gut and how we all have millions of microbes in our system and how you could change your health completely if you paid attention to that. This is a book about the microbiome of the world, and it's a whole other way of looking at the world. And then I'm reading a book that came out this year by a Harvard politics professor named Michael Sandel, called The Tyranny of Merit. And it's his reading on different populist trends that are happening all around the world, including in America. He sees it as a whole population of people who have felt that the idea of a meritocracy has actually been a betrayal, and that they feel betrayed by politicians saying, you can make it, everybody can make it. And they say, oh, really? I've had the same wages for 40 years. You can't say that I can make it. And so that builds up a groundswell of resentment that leads to the political discord of our moment. So I thought that was an original way of thinking about it.
Yeah, great. Thank you for sharing a personal question. All right. Well, people can continue to drop some questions in the chat or unmute yourself. But Bob, if you would like to ask us some questions, I think we're all here for it. And people can feel free to unmute if you have answers.
Well, I mean, I'd say one of the things that I loved writing about this family was the way that everyone's thoughts about their parents changed over time, that they grew up thinking one thing about judging their parents or idolizing their father perhaps and judging their mother. And then they all grow up and they start to see their mother with different eyes and their father with different eyes. And I guess the one question I like to ask readers is, what did you think of Mimi in the end? Because I do feel like the book is really hard on her in the beginning and then maybe less hard on her in the second part of it. And some people feel like they don't know what to think of her. So I thought I would ask if anyone had a gut reaction to her.
I was very irritated because Don was gone all the time. Mm-hmm. And it just irritated me that she kept having these babies and he was an absent father. And I just, I thought, doesn't she get life? Hasn't she figured it out? Mm-hmm. But that was in the first, I really was aggravated. She was like a doormat to me.
Mm-hmm. I've been hearing that a lot. The people saying, why did they keep having so many children? Mm-hmm. One reader theorized that the children gave her more clout in the relationship, that the more children she had, the more powerful she felt. That mm-hmm. having 2 kids and having a husband who's zipping around the world is different from having 12 kids and having a husband who's zipping around the world. That I thought that was very provocative. I hadn't considered that as I was writing it. But I like your reading of it is perhaps valid too. Maybe she was a doormat. Maybe she was being submissive and not really reading the situation well. She definitely got bitter later on and snappish about him, and hard to separate that, I guess, from their tragedies, though.
Thank you.
Are there other thoughts on that?
I liked, it took a while talking to the 2 sisters about this, but I liked being able to separate what they thought of their mother when they were teenagers in their 20s from what they thought about her in their 40s or 50s. And I felt like that was something really relatable, speaking as a 51-year-old, that your impressions of your family change. And I feel privileged to be able to write about a family over time that way, the same way that a novelist could write about a family in like East of Eden or something like that carries it over many, many different generations. Mm-hmm. It's not often that a nonfiction writer can do that. And so I was thrilled to be able to try to get some of that across to readers.
Yeah, I had conflicting thoughts. I'm sure everyone did about Mimi. And there was one line, I was just trying to find it, but I can't, when she said something like, when someone asked why she's so upbeat, which isn't a word I would always use to describe her. And she said, you can't be disappointed every day.
Yeah.
Or something like that. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, I don't know, that just made me feel so sad. I mean, for her, and that was her reality. It wasn't like she could just leave like Dawn did or pretend like it wasn't happening, because she was the only one who seemed like she was going to do anything about it, even if she wasn't doing the right thing.
Right. And she made colossal mistakes, but on the other hand, she was the decider because he was so absent and then so helpless, that she really was the one who kept the family together. She's the reason why science is studying the family. And I asked that question all the time to everyone in the family, but especially the two daughters. I said, why didn't you just leave town and not come back? Why didn't you go to LA and go to law school and send a Christmas card every year? I mean, why put yourself back in this? And of course, every time I asked it, it was a way of provoking conversation that really was helpful to help me understand why they did it. And again, just trying to be able to tell that story, not minute to minute, it would be too long a book, but like year to year or decade to decade, to see how little things shift in them and allow them to come back to their family on their terms. Mm-hmm. But even so, one daughter says, my mom says she would say something like, my mom says things like, you can't be heartbroken every day. That's kind of weird, I know, but it's also kind of inspiring. Maybe I can be inspired by that. And then the other daughter would say, my mom says, you can't be heartbroken every day. Have you ever heard of such a load of malarkey? Like, that's horrible. Like, but they're sisters in this, they're each processing the same thing differently.
On a different topic, I was just going to say, jump back to the very beginning of our Zoom together, and you talked about how the research budget was small and finding these science books, and I don't know why I didn't think about that sooner. This is more of a statement to say I'm really glad that you mentioned that. As someone who studied the DSM in my personal educational journey, my immediate thoughts are like, okay, well, what do I know about schizophrenia, and where am I with the DSM, and what are studies saying right now? So when when I'm contemplating like, oh, how did he write this, and what was he thinking, and how did he evaluate these people? I think it's interesting for you to mention going back to texts that existed during that time, and how did people evaluate it then as they were experiencing it, versus us doing it with what we know now and looking back on their lives. I don't know. For the last hour in the back of my brain, that's all I've just like constant like back here. So I just want to say thank you for mentioning that, because I think it's also something that, as someone who doesn't write enough anymore, but used to love to write, I think it's just really important to consider in terms of like a process and research. I don't know. I just want to say thank you for sharing that bit.
Oh, well, thank you. I think, that idea definitely bubbled up over time. I didn't sit down on day one and think, I shall also tell the story of schizophrenia in stages. And it was through a lot of trial and error. And it also had to do with probably the way that I learn and understand things, because there are a couple free neuroscience classes online that I could sit and listen to lectures from MIT about neuroscience, but I would start to listen to them and I'd think, I can't get into this. I don't understand. And if I had picked up a copy of the DSM from any era, the new one, one of the old ones, and gone into that cold, I probably wouldn't have gotten anything from that either. But once I started to look at this subject as a story, with competing ideas and a running debate about what it was that changed over time with different people involved and characters, that's how I was able to get my head around it. And so that's the story I ended up telling. Also, I read another book. I read other books to try to be models about it. And there's a book, it's called Genie. It came out 15 or 20 years ago, and it's not about schizophrenia. It's one of these stories about how researchers found a child who, due to a horrible abusive situation, had never accessed language. Like, she was kept prisoner and never learned to speak. And so as the therapists were working with her to try to get her mainstream, they also were trying to learn about how the brain accesses language and how much harder will it be for her to learn to speak at the age of 11 as opposed to the age of 2 or something like that. Very tragic book, but also a case study kind of book. And that book actually started to weave in other stories about about the science of linguistics and how it evolved over time. And I thought, oh, I could do this. And so I started to, I began by trying to mimic that approach.
Yeah, I'm sure that was a very different approach from normal journalism to use out-of-date materials as your like sources. So that's very interesting.
Yeah, and I think if you think about what you talked about, like what it will look like, you know, people not wanting to call it schizophrenia anymore, and what it'll look like 10, 20 years from now. I mean, I can really see this book being used as a staple in, you know, academia and how people can discuss what it looks like currently versus then and all that. So I don't know, just really a lot to think about.
Yeah, I'm very curious about whether colleges will pick it up in paperback. The paperback's in March, which will give people time to decide whether they want it for the fall semester. I'm wondering if that'll happen. I see in the chat someone's mentioning Educated. Terrific book.
Yeah, that's one of our book club books a couple of semesters ago.
So it's a wonderful book, and I think I only read it in the middle of working on this. It hadn't really been out and wasn't, or at least it wasn't a hit, but when I was starting work on it. And in fact, the woman who edited Educated is a really wonderful person, and she was one person I shopped the book to, and I just ended up going with a different publishing house. So it could have been that I would have, like in the months that I was starting to work on this book, her other book, Educated, would have been this big hit, and then I would have been sitting there going, oh, great, now I've got to make a book as good as Educated. So it's probably better that that didn't happen. But I think that Margaret, the older of the two sisters, that she sees her story as more like Educated, as someone who is able to make it through a hard childhood and set up boundaries. And I mean, Tara Westover actually left her family completely, or cut ties with half her family. Margaret sets up boundaries, and it doesn't quite do that, but she relates to Tara Westover very much. And she probably would have been happier if the book were more like Educated. But I feel like her Educated story is in there somewhere. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah, that's great.
I actually, I actually, when you were comparing Margaret to Tara Westover, and one of the things that I was concerned about towards the end of the book was how much Lindsay started to take over Mimi's role as the caretaker. And I got worried that because, you know, that was so hard on Mimi, that would also be so hard on Lindsay as well. Yes,
and that is her constant challenge, that it takes over her life, and that it hurts her relationships with other people. And it's something she deals with all the time in her own therapy and in her world. But I don't mean to say that to suggest that she's not functional, because she's, the interesting thing about all of the family members who aren't mentally ill is that they're all, you'd run into them at the Whole Foods or I don't know, skiing, or on a city bus, and you would talk to them, and they're completely functional people. But these are the things that are nagging at them. You know, for her, these family issues are really always present.
Thank you. Oh, okay. There's a question in the chat that's intriguing me. Will you talk about the research you did with falconry? It was an interesting part of their story in the beginning. I love that. So,
sure. I think I might have learned more about falconry than I needed to, probably as a procrastinating technique. Like I was a little intimidated by the science, so I was like, well, I'll read another book about falconry just to make sure that I have that right. And also they were so proud of it. Particularly Mimi was so proud and so into it. And of course they have a role in history. Don did suggest the falcon as the Air Force mascot. It's right there. I went to the archives at the Air Force Library. There's a record of it. His letter's there. It's dated before anyone else suggested it. He's the guy who did it. So they have their claim to fame. And so I thought, well, this could be a big part of the book. And I also, it wasn't lost on me that this made them feel powerful and successful. And they felt like with hard work and determination and discipline, they could tame something that was wild, and they could accomplish anything. And to me, that was in tune with the ethos of the times, the 1950s after the war. particularly a military family, feeling like, and then into the Kennedy years thinking, it's a new frontier, we can do anything, working at NORAD, we have the technology to make the world, to bring democracy to the entire planet. Everything is very triumphal to them. And then the worst happens. The worst, most unimaginable thing happens that they have no control over. And to me, that was something I knew I would have to explore. And so I ended up looking into falconry a lot. And in fact, I didn't know how the book would end. And I thought that one way to end it might be for me to take one more trip out to Colorado. I took 7 or 8 trips to Colorado. But I would take one more trip to Colorado, and that some of the brothers and sisters and I would take Donald out for an afternoon to a place where you can, they can fly falcons, with a falcon expert, someone who keeps falcons, and then just like see the look on his face or see how he processes the experience. Cause he obviously it was such a big part of his life at some point, but we never did any of that. That fell away toward the end.
That's really incredible. Thank you for sharing. And maybe our last, I want to be respectful of everybody's time. So kind of the same 1950s question. Jan says, it struck me how violent the boys were. Did the parents think that was boys will be boys rather than a real problem to confront?
This was a very difficult thing to nail down for a nonfiction book, not having been there. And it really did seem like there were 2 ways of looking at it, that this was the 50s, that they lived on a military base, that if you're going to have 12 kids, you can't helicopter them. You have to leave it up to them. They have to, they have to tough it out and grow up, and you shouldn't coddle boys, like all the things that you might imagine one might say in that era of parenting. And then there's the other way of looking at it, which is this is really quite abnormal behavior, and that the parents were deliberately in denial to anything wrong because they thought they were so perfect. And I've seen readers react that way. They've said something is wrong with these parents, that they don't see what's happening here. And so I tried to get both of those ideas in there and make it clear that it wasn't necessarily conclusive about either. And I think while that isn't satisfying, I think that's a reality in most historical nonfiction books, that sometimes there are things you'll never really know. But also I think it's true to the experience of a lot of people with troubled children, that you never know if the 14-year-old who does something is doing it because they're 14 and they're going to grow out of it 6 weeks from now, or that it's a sign of the shape of things to come, and that things will be horrible for that kid forever. And so that I think that's universal almost.
Yeah, that's great. Well, we're at 7 o'clock, 7:03 technically. So I obviously want Bob to feel comfortable. So I'm just so grateful for all of you for coming here tonight, and especially Bob. Thank you so much for carving time out to join our little Jayhawk book club. It's just like Oprah's book club, only Kansas, smaller. So we're so glad to have had you.
Thanks to everyone who came out, and thanks for letting me talk about the book. I'm really grateful. And Leah, thank you for making all the arrangements. And you said Leanne's an organizer with the club too. Thank you, Leanne. And Michelle, you were on first. Are you an organizer too? Or yeah, thank you very much. Thanks so much. And
Thank
have a great
you.
evening, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great night. Thank you, Bob.
Bye, everyone.